I met my husband Jose, who was 21 at the time, in a library when I was 19. I had never been in a relationship or even been on a date before meeting him. My main emphasis in university was my studies, and I was quite introverted. I didn't want anything to distract me. One day in the library, he approached me and complimented me, saying he had spotted me and wanted to get to know me better. He asked for my phone number, but I politely declined. I didn't want to give anyone my phone number, and I had no intention of getting engaged with anyone at school. I just wanted to concentrate on my studies and finish my degree. He would frequently come over to the table where I was studying with my friends during the next few months. He arrived alone at times, and at others he would join in on talks with my pals. I eventually grew accustomed to seeing him every day, observing him from a distance as I studied and noting how well he got along with my friends. I grew concerned when he failed to appear at the library one day. I asked my friends if they had heard anything about his disappearance, but they said they hadn't. One of them even told me, his life doesn't revolve around you. Perhaps he became bored with waiting for you and moved on. Those words sting, and I didn't realize why at the time. I only recognized I was falling for him later, and the thought that he might have gone on pained me terribly. He didn't show up the next day either, which worried me even more. I asked my friends if they had his phone number so I could call him if he was sick or in the hospital. They all assured me, however, that they didn't have his phone number since I had specifically requested them not to take it. In retrospect, it appeared weird. The next day he went back to the library, just as he always did. He entered with his pals, said his goodbyes, and proceeded to the shelves. He picked up a textbook with the code K301 and joined us at our table this time. It was the first time I genuinely paid attention to what he was learning. "What happened to you?" I couldn't help but wonder. "We haven't seen you for 2 days," he said teasingly. "Oh, she speaks." And the table burst out laughing. "I'm being entirely serious here. I hadn't seen you in 2 days and I was frightened," I explained as I removed my spectacles. I looked him in the eyes for what felt like the first time in a long semester. He returned my stare, confused at first, then with a smirk on his lips. He was incredibly attractive, almost like a cartoon character. I couldn't help but wonder why it had taken so long for me to notice. He was of average build, but his startlingly good looks made up for it. His beautiful blue eyes were like an unending abyss, and despite his little stature of 5 feet 9 inches, he emanated a powerful presence. His voice was deep and gruff, and I remember occasionally feeling vibrations in my body when he spoke. It may sound ridiculous, but those are the times I miss the most right now. "You? Concerned about me?" He responded after a brief pause, his voice somewhat amused. "I believe you, but I'm not sure you even know what my name is." He added in a humorous tone, "Anthony," to which I quickly responded, eliciting laughter from my table mates. "You see, you don't even know my name," he joked, laughing along with them. "That's a nickname I earned in junior high that has lasted with me all the way to college. After all, it's not Anthony, like the owner of Marvel Comics." He then stood up and proceeded to a different table, preferring to sit alone. I'd never seen him sit in the library, let alone. I felt awful for not knowing his name because he seemed to have heard me. I couldn't help but steal looks at him, nervously biting my nails and hoping he'd return to our table or at the very least return a glance. He was engaged in the books he had taken from the shelf for the next 3 hours. It was understandable given the impending examinations, but I couldn't shake the idea that I was the cause of his shift in focus. My friend Reagan recommended that if you miss him so much, you should go talk to him. Should I talk to him? No way. I murmured as I replaced my spectacles and returned to my studies. I had already mastered the content in the book I was reading, and I was well into my exam preparations. I kept flipping through the papers, debating whether or not I should approach him. I eventually gave up, rose up, and walked over to where he was seated. I apologized in what he subsequently described as the cutest anime-style apology ever. He raised an eyebrow at me, as he did when he asked someone to repeat himself. I sat across from him at the table. Starting a conversation was difficult, and he appeared to notice. He assured me that he was not unhappy, despite his disappointment that I didn't know his name. He said that he had changed tables since he needed to concentrate on preparing for an important test. He stated that the professor was tough and did not hand out good grades lightly. He highlighted how important it was for him to complete the course and avoid having to spend another year in college. He also joked that he would have stayed at our table, but it was more appealing to him to spend time staring at me rather than reading. "So what's your name then?" I mustered the nerve to inquire. He closed his book, a warm smile on his face. "Let me introduce you to Daniel," he added as he extended his hand for a handshake. I've always felt that Daniel and Daniel would make an excellent couple name, and I still do. I couldn't figure out why I had blown my previous opportunity. I felt a thrill of excitement as he reached for my hand as I stood up to depart. "I'd like to take you out after my test tomorrow if you're not too busy," he proposed. I was overjoyed when he asked me out on a date. I knew if he had asked sooner, I would have jumped at the chance, but now I was nervous with butterflies in my stomach because of this young man. I really wish I had a time machine. I would have handled the situation differently. I would have paid more attention to him, worked harder to make him happy, and been less selfish. But here I am, crying and reminiscing about the beautiful times I had with Daniel, hoping for sympathy from strangers. Our evening was fantastic, and I greatly liked his company. He had a terrific sense of humor and presented insightful ideas. He was charming, and I couldn't help but notice how jealous the other girls were when they saw us together. During our date, he mentioned that he had been the runner-up for Mr. Palmer, and I couldn't help but believe it was well-deserved because few males looked better than him. Our friendship at Palmer was like something out of a high school romance story. He was always invited to events, and when he came, we walked together. We were inseparable and even received the title of most influential couple in his final semester of college, largely due to him because no one knew who I was before we started dating. He was my first of everything, including my first date, kiss, and love. But I wasn't his first. Except for getting married, he had done everything before. He was always gentle with me, explaining topics I didn't understand and rarely becoming irritated. I made a stupid error. I was continually comparing our sexual encounters, and I was unhappy that he was the only one on my list. I wanted to be able to brag about additional adventures. To level the playing field, I believed it was a reasonable notion to sleep with other individuals. I started talking about opening up our marriage a few months after we got married. I discussed it before, but his harsh rejection made me afraid I'd lose him if I pursued it. I once asked him what his reaction would be if we opened things up a little further. His direct remark, "I'll leave without a second thought," irritated me. I thought he was unfairly limiting me, especially because he had his own adventures before we met. I waited a few more months before bringing it up again, but he provided the same steadfast response. This persuaded me to wait until after we married, hoping that he would see things from my point of view once we were married. When we ultimately got married, I decided to bring it up again. I have to admit that marrying him solely so I could explore my sexuality without losing the man I loved was selfish. I thought that now that I had him, I could do whatever I wanted. I truly regret not listening to and comprehending his thoughts on the subject. I choose to ignore his statements, and now I hate myself for letting my one true love go. They say that opportunities come just once in a lifetime, and now I understand that I've squandered my one chance of being accepted for who I am. Many years after Daniel died, I still haven't found somebody who treats me as well as he did or loves me as much as he did. Our honeymoon lasted 4 months, or at least it would have if I hadn't wrecked it. We've been together for 5 years, and my desire to be intimate with other men started 3 years ago. During our honeymoon, I fantasized about being with someone else while my spouse was watching, which I dearly regret. There is usually a temptation or motivator for committing heinous things, and mine was a man named Levi. He was tall, towering at 6 feet 5 inches, and he exercised on a daily basis. He appeared to be a giant with massive muscles, and he always dressed in clothing that showed off the hours he spent at the gym. I'm fairly tall, standing at 6 feet 1 inch, so meeting someone who made me feel small was an unusual sensation. He was a new employee at my business who eventually became my superior in the hierarchy, which meant I had to report to him on a daily basis. He was in his 30s, which made him older than my husband, or should I say ex-husband. He had a very flirty approach, often speaking softly as if attempting to attract me. Reporting to him on a daily basis became difficult since I had to retain my professionalism while being tremendously attracted to him. Then one day, he invited me to join him for drinks. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was he flirting with me or just being friendly? Did he genuinely like me, or did he see my attractiveness and want to take advantage of it? These thoughts raced through my mind. I didn't think about how my dear Daniel might react, nor did I think about hurting him. We went out for drinks near the office, and I drank more than I should have. Our chat evolved from getting to know each other to a more private and intimate topic that was not intended for public consumption. I told him about my desires. I aspired to be more than one man's wife. I told him I wanted to open up my marriage for sexual emancipation without feeling guilty, and I even confessed to developing a crush on him. When he asked whether I had talked to my husband about it, I said yes, but he doesn't see things the same way I do, and he threatened to leave if I went ahead with it. Levi then gave me counsel that, in retrospect, was stupid. At the time, I was looking for anything that might relieve me of the consequences of my decisions. Instead of asking my husband, he suggested that I tell them that we should open up the marriage for my enjoyment. Looking back, I see Levi was the type of person who gave bad counsel with complete certainty that it was the right course of action. Now I see why he said those things. He wanted to be with me. He made me feel like the most important person in the world that night. I knew that was the same treatment I got from Daniel every day, but having it from someone else for the first time ever made me feel like a teenager. After exchanging kisses, we parted ways that day. My spouse was asleep in the living room when I arrived home, most likely because he had been waiting for me to return from work. I entered silently and went to the bathroom to shower and brush my teeth to remove the stench of alcohol. I was still a touch tipsy, but it was manageable. I called him and informed him that I needed to speak with him about something. He remarked that he, too, had something wonderful to contribute, but let me speak first. He had a lovely smile on his face as he listened intently. His smile, however, vanished in an instant. I didn't mind because I had convinced myself that I was acting correctly. I told him, I just want you to know that this is something I have to do. I'd appreciate your help. I can't get over the fact that you have far more experience than I have. It gives me the impression that you chose me. I don't want to be the girl you choose. I want to be sought after and admired by other guys, just like you were previously with other women. I don't think I'll be able to be happy unless I do this. We're discussing the marriage, but it's not up for debate. Those were the harsh things I said to the man I loved when others referred to me as a wend, a college term derived from weird nerd. Those were the words I spoke with the man who erased the nicknames, the one who gave me some of the attention I believed I deserved. These words haunt me, and I cry every time I recall the incident. What kind of stupid young lady was I? He stared me in the eyes for a moment, then lowered his head as if defeated. He sat there for what seemed like an hour in silence before saying, "Well, you've said your piece, so there you have it." He stood up and went to his room, leaving me to ponder what he had meant to tell me earlier. He disregarded it, stating it was nothing, and blamed his exhaustion on office overthinking. The next day, I walked right into my boss's arms. That morning in his office, we were intimate, and that was only the beginning. Levi was my first non-Daniel intimate lover. There were plenty more to come. I frequently went out with my coworkers on Fridays to their normal TTGIF spot, and every now and again, I would wake up on a Saturday next to a stranger I had never met before and would never meet again. To say the least, I was promiscuous. I assumed it was simply a phase and that I would grow out of it. But I had no idea what the cost of my newfound understanding would be. I kept talking to different males virtually every day or every other day. Levi showed up at my place 2 months later as I was getting ready for work. He was scheduled to pick me up, presuming that my husband had already left for work. I figured I'd take advantage of the opportunity for a quick meeting before we both went to the office. Levi was holding a bunch of flowers when my husband opened the door. As I was washing my hair, I couldn't hear their talk over the sound of the running shower. They were exchanging pleasantries when I walked out. Daniel made a lighthearted remark, "So you're the individual who screws my wife while I change light bulbs." Daniel was never one to express his feelings, whether they were rage, pain, disappointment, or sorrow. He was difficult to read. His sole expression was a smile or a frown. So I honestly believe he was content with our open marriage arrangement. He even went so far as to hold the door open for me as I entered Levy's vehicle. My youthful and naive mind couldn't comprehend the huge error I had made in my marriage. Levi made a joke about how well my husband seemed to be taking the open marriage concept on our way to work. He mentioned that my husband might be a cook and even indicated that if he wants to observe, we can make it happen. That day was a Friday, but unlike the previous 2 months, I did not go out with my coworkers. Instead, my employer, Levi, and I booked a hotel with glass windows that overlooked the city's nightlife. We had a satisfying, intimate meeting that night. When I went home the following Saturday and opened the door, I instantly noticed a difference in the mood. It had been abnormally silent. My husband and I didn't usually work on Saturdays, and he would spend the mornings blasting his favorite music through the speakers. Even if I returned home in the early hours after working late or having one of my affairs, he would still be listening to music loudly. I went to our in-house gym to find him not on the treadmill, as he typically is on Saturdays. Then I walked to the kitchen, expecting that he had made coffee, as was his custom. I noticed my favorite cup on the kitchen counter, which made me grin because it reminded me of the life we'd lived since moving in together 3 years before our 2-year marriage. I picked up the cup with the intention of taking a sip, but it was empty. When I opened the cup, I found an enclosed note inside. I can't remember what the letter said exactly, but I saved it as a reminder of how I let something lovely break apart because of my need for more romantic encounters. I'm extremely dissatisfied with myself. Despite having made numerous foolish choices throughout my life, that decision to allow Daniel to escape in such a carefree manner must have been the most foolish. I took the letter from the envelope and placed it in the cup, which still had his aroma on the inside after 5 years. "Hey, I hope you're doing well," said the note. You're probably wondering why Smooth Criminal isn't playing on the speakers right now. I'll most likely be in South Africa by the time you read this. My company is establishing a 5-year initiative to develop Africa's greatest computer-literate minds, and I'll be spending the next 5 years there. Don't worry, I'm not forgetting about your betrayal. When I return, we will start the divorce process. I hope Levi's company and the other men you spent time with were worthwhile. I assumed you were joking when you initially said it, but yesterday proved different. I'm sorry I ever met you. If I could go back in time and change one thing about my life, it would be to leave the first time you said no. I'm not going to pretend that you're not worth the anguish you've given me over the years. I'm not hoping for the best for you." Along with the note, there was a plane ticket for Saturday, June 7, 2014, as well as a passport with my name on it. There was a statement on the back of the airplane ticket that said, "Remember the news I shared with you 2 months ago?" That's all there is to it. My firm is paying for both of us to remain in South Africa. They're even considering hiring you. His wedding band was at the bottom of the cup. My entire universe collapsed in front of me. The remainder of the day was spent staring at the cup. I was unable to eat or drink anything. I was utterly overwhelmed by shock. The next year was a long period of depression as my life gradually unraveled, beginning with the day Levy's best friend, Charles, came to collect all of Livy's stuff. As I watched him and the movers remove Levy's belongings, I burst into tears. Charles, out of generosity, allowed me to retain a box of Levi's cologne and his favorite hoodie, but he came the following day to recover them. He came in and found me still dressed in the same attire I had worn to work on Friday. I was too exhausted from crying for almost 24 hours to struggle as Charles furiously pulled the hoodie from my grasp. He sneered at me and said, "Stanley, tell me about what you did. You've brought shame to women everywhere, and I hope you live with this sorrow for the rest of your life." He then took the fragrance and walked away, saying, "If it weren't for the laws of this country, I'd spit in your face. I hope your life is as depressing and empty as this room." Charles was never one to keep his thoughts to himself. His words wounded me then, but they hurt even more today because my home has been sad and empty since my beloved half left me. Levi was transferred again just a week after the event, this time at his own desire. I asked him why he had requested the transfer, expecting that we were working together to build something. He informed me flatly that he was leaving me, that he had had a good time, and that it was time to move on. He also encouraged me to end my relationship with Levi before it was too late, not comprehending that it was already too late a week before. My next supervisor was really strict. It wasn't long before I was chastised for my errors as a result of my insecurity at the time. And because I wasn't emotionally involved with him, it wasn't long before I was sacked from my job. After Charles informed them of what had occurred, my parents shunned me. They were both ministers at the church I grew up in, and they were deeply pious people. They didn't want to be linked with someone they thought was immoral, someone who would end her marriage simply to feel another man's hands going down her thighs. I never received closure. I kept my lines of communication open in the hopes that Levi would contact me. The 5 years he described passed without us saying anything, and I heard nothing about him returning to the nation. When I tried to contact Charles, I discovered that he had joined Levi a year later in South Africa. I began to lose all of my friends. Most of my friends had simply tolerated me. It became evident to me. I understood that being one half of the former marriage was the only thing I had going for me. I realized I wasn't funny, and I wasn't even pleasant to be around. I realized that I could be a very tough person to be around. All of these realizations brought me to my knees. I didn't just go back to square one after Charles left me. I sank even further into depression. Now, about a decade later, in 2023, at the age of 36, I've never had a romance that lasted more than 3 months. I'm very unhappy with my life, and I sometimes fantasize of dying peacefully in my sleep. I occasionally resent Daniel for his quick departure. I hope that anyone thinking about opening up her marriage sees this and avoids that terrible mistake of a notion. I'm still holding out hope that I'll run into Daniel one day. I'd like to apologize and let him know that I haven't moved on. I still love him, despite the fact that it has been 10 years. I'd like to express how hurting him was the worst thing I'd ever done and how I had hoped to start a new life with him. My dating life has also taken a hit. No one wants to be with the woman who broke her husband's heart simply because she wanted to try something new. I've been in a few relationships, but every time the story comes up, I can clearly see the love evaporate from these men's faces. I'm still living in the house Daniel and I bought together. We chose a tiny home since we imagined a small family. I really need closure, but I can't afford therapy because I haven't been able to find work since my replacement boss fired me 10 years ago. I've been having financial difficulties. Thank you for spending the time to read this fairly lengthy account. This update summarizes what has happened since I originally posted this 2 months ago. For anyone who missed my earlier post, this is an update on how my spouse or ex-husband left me after I decided to open up our marriage. It's been more than 9 years since he left, and throughout the years, I've realized how insignificant I've become without him. I lost everyone I cared about, primarily because they adored him and tolerated me only out of necessity. However, for the first time since he left, things have begun to improve. First and foremost, I know he noticed my prior post because he called me shortly after I posted it. I was overjoyed to hear his voice after such a long period. I missed his deep, gruff baritone, which always sent thrills down my spine. I couldn't help but cry as I listened to how much I had hurt him over our hours-long talk. He admitted that he never expected me to do it and initially mistook it for one of my late April Fool's pranks. He'd admitted that seeing and speaking with Levi killed a part of him. He felt foolish and despised himself for remaining until I shattered him. He stated why he did not return after the first 5 years. He needed that long to get over me. He began to discover happiness again at the end of the program. He acknowledged that he didn't want to see me since doing so would endanger his newfound happiness. In exchange, I gave an account of how my life had unfolded. Throughout what felt like a 2-hour phone chat, tears poured down my cheeks as we reminisced about the wonderful days, and I couldn't help but feel guilty for letting this man go. He informed me at the end of our talk that he would be in the US within a week and intended to pay me a visit at my home. He'd arrived at my residence a week later as promised, not to renew our romance, but to serve divorce papers. He saw the anguish that had overtaken my existence within the house. He observed the letter, and his ring remained at the bottom of the cup. He noticed that the rooms he had emptied were still empty over a decade later. For the first time in our relationship, I was able to detect his feelings, pity. I felt pity in his eyes as he questioned me about my life, and I told him more information that I hadn't already disclosed over the phone. He inquired about Levi, describing him as a tall, unsightly, muscular man. I retold the story of Levi entering the picture, spending 2 months with me, and then leaving. He clicked his tongue in disgust, a behavior he may have picked up in Africa. He shook his head and said, "So you threw away a 7-year relationship for just 2 months of sex?" Then he questioned the sexual experience's quality. To be honest, no one had ever treated me better in the bedroom than Daniel. He understood my desires and had a talent for meeting them. He wasn't like the other men who were only looking for brief hookups. It broke my heart to admit that I had given up everything that identified me for something Daniel excelled at, even more than the other 14 guys I had spent time with. He volunteered to cover the expense of my therapy out of sympathy. He remarked that he had moved on and that he thought I deserved to as well. He made me feel like the center of the universe for one last time before leaving. We've officially formalized our divorce, and I've been in therapy for a month thanks to Daniel. I'm grateful to God for the lovely man he brought into my life, and I still regret ruining it. But now is the time to focus on being a better person, even if it took me 36 years to discover it. I'd like to thank you all again for taking the time to read this. I hope nothing else comes up that will force me to return here, and I hope to finally move on with my life.